I made Marvel Rival heroes into Overwatch. As many of us know, Marvel Rivals and Overwatch showcase a lot of extreme similarities, both having two teams going head-to-head with a cast of unique and original heroes. Although many of the heroes boast similar characteristics, each have their own playstyle and unique elements. But that begs the question, if Marvel Rival heroes were in Overwatch, how would they fit with the meta? What would their tier list rankings be? So I put it onto myself to fully develop Marvel Rivals heroes in Overwatch using the workshop. With enough said, hi, I'm Blueberry and let's check out those heroes. I will note a disclaimer that these heroes aren't going to be exactly the same in damage, cooldown, or effects. Think of them more like completely reworking certain Overwatch heroes to match Marvel Rivals playstyles. Speaking of, let's start developing our first hero, and who not better to start with than everyone's fan favorite, the Scarlet Witch. The first step is picking which hero to rework, and well, the Scarlet Witch has a beam that locks into enemies, a fade that makes her invulnerable, and throws on an orb that damages enemies. Yeah, it was pretty much a no-brainer that Moira would be the Scarlet Witch. First thing on the list was turning her primary fire into Scarlet Witch's Chthonian Burst. Hopefully I'm saying that right. That only required me to create orb projectiles in the place of her heals. As of right now, I made these deal 40 damage with a range of 3 meters. I had to play around with these numbers to find something that seemed balanced, but considering I'm only in Grandmasters, do spare some of my bad balance decisions. Well, let me know what you think the stat should be in the comments below. Next was Scarlet Witch's Mystic Projection. It's an ability in which she gains invulnerability, speed, and flight. Luckily, I was able to reuse Fade, but additionally granted it flight during the duration, as well as a second charge, since it has one. But imagining a hero with 2 charges of a Moira Fade with flight sounds absolutely terrifying. So I did take the liberty to increase the cooldown from 8 seconds to 12 seconds. And next was Scarlet Witch's Dark Seal, a chaos orb that stuns and damages enemies. For this, I reused Moira's melee animation to throw out a biotic orb that explodes and stuns enemies within the duration. Right now, it deals 25 damage and stuns for 0.5 seconds, which hopefully you guys like. Last but definitely not least is Scarlet Witch's ultimate, in which she erases nearby enemies. Since there's nothing really like this in Overwatch, I decided to create a large amount of creative liberty, and here are the results.
Surrender to my will.
Personally, I'm really proud of it. I did the best with what I had in workshop effects, so hopefully you guys enjoy it as well. The finishing touch was changing her sub role to damage. Since she was no longer a support, I decided to go with Flanker, which meant granting her increased healing from health packs, which I felt matched her playstyle. And Scarlet Witch was finally finished. She plays a very manic flanking dive hero with heavy burst damage and crowd control. Her kit is definitely powerful and I can see her easily dominating lower ranks. However, she plays like a glass cannon, as her low health can cause her to easily die to a sleep or a hinder. For team compositions, she absolutely thrives in dive, being paired with Winston, Tracer, Mercy, and Kiriko, or Diva, Genji, Jetpack, and Juno. Though she is a force to be reckoned with, she can easily be shut down with well-timed cooldowns and needs to play smart to ensure her maximized potential. With our first damage hero added, I wanted a support to be the next addition. And though I had a lot of great options to choose from, Loki was the most reasonable for me to create, mainly due to his ultimates already being in the game. Thank you so much, Echo. So first things first was making her weapon heal allies. Now, I can't just make Echo's bullets heal, so I decided to make a really smart workaround. I had her shoot a 4th projectile in her primary fire that heals allies for 50 HP, which recreates the mechanics of Loki's weapon. Now, obviously, the most exciting part of his kit comes from his clones, which I wanted to make sure I got absolutely perfect. Creating clones in Overwatch actually isn't that hard, but I did want to make sure it looked good. Luckily, Echo's beam was a perfect starting tool to simulate the creation of clones, which looks great. All that's left was to have the clones shoot when she shoots, reload when she reloads, and melee when she melees, and the clones are finally complete. Now, Echo has only 2 ability slots left, while Loki has 3 more abilities, meaning one of them would have to be cut. Unfortunately, Regeneration Domain would be the trickiest to recreate in Overwatch. If you don't know, it acts as a field that turns all healing into damage. However, we can make Loki's devious exchange, where he swaps places with one of his clones. Luckily for us, Echo's dash could be used as a perfect transition when teleporting. So I just had her teleport to a clone she was looking to, and then consume that bot. The last thing left to add was Loki's Deception, where he goes invisible and leaves behind a clone. All this took was making her invisible and creating a clone where she stands. She can swap clones and reload while invisible, but shooting, creating a clone, or taking damage will exit her out. Oh, and I almost forgot. Since Echo is now support, I also had to change her sub role. I landed on Medic as she didn't have much form of self-heal in her abilities. And considering Echo and Loki already have a matching ult, we can finally call Loki finished. Loki is a very strategic hero to play in Overwatch, the likes of which has never been present in the game. All of his abilities require you to think ahead. His only means of escape is teleporting to an already existing clone. His Deception can be used on a whim as it can be forced out with damage, and he doesn't do enough healing on his own, requiring clones to make up for it. All in all, he's an extremely high skill floor and ceiling, but if you can use him well and position his clones strategically, I can see him being a powerhouse in the meta. He definitely fits perfectly in a poke team composition, with heroes like Sigma, Freya, Hanzo, and Zenyatta, or Domina, Sojourn, Ashe, and Alari. I can also imagine insane synergies with players like Mercy having more people to fly to, or Lifekeeper being able to uplift his clones. After adding our first supports, I wanted to go back to adding a damage hero. One of the easier heroes would be Phoenix, considering she has an Overwatch counterpart. Who, you might ask? I mean, do I really need to say anything? And funny enough, even their passives are also extremely similar. However, I do have to develop Phoenix's other abilities. Since Onron only has 2 ability slots, I had to choose which Phoenix abilities to recreate. I started with Telepathic Illusion, in which Phoenix dashes away and leaves behind a fiery explosion. Onron pretty much already had a dash, which coincides with the ability. All I had to do was cut her ability short and then create a delayed fireball explosion, which I think turned out pretty well. The damage and duration I played around with the most to make sure it was balanced while still impactful. As of right now, I kept it at 75 damage with a 0.75 second delay, enough for you to react to. Next, I decided to go with Psionic Detonation as her second ability, as Phoenix's flight would be a little awkward to showcase in game. Or maybe not, I guess. Since there's not really a tornado effect in-game, I decided to reuse the fireball effect again. All I had to do now was repeat it 3 times, one after the other. I'll play around with the damage and timing to make sure it felt satisfying but not too overpowered. In the end, each fireball initially does 25 damage and explodes with 75 damage in a 5-meter range. Reading this out loud now, that sounds like a lot, but I swear it's a lot harder to get value out of its ability than you might think, mainly because of its range, but I agree to disagree. After removing her Resurrection ultimate, Phoenix was finally added into the cast of Overwatch. Phoenix plays as a mid to close range main DPS, being able to deal large amounts of burst damage and pressure with her fireballs. Her dash does allow her to take off angles and deal with dive tanks due to its secondary explosion. For team compositions, she's mostly comfortable played in Brawl, being paired with Ramatra, Cassidy, Mizuki, and Lucio, or Reinhardt, Emre, Brigitte, and Moira. Though her abilities allow her to burn away through slow and large tanks, enemies like Genji and Tracer who can dodge her explosions often put her at risk. Now after all the damage talk, I finally want to go back to supports. After Loki, the only other support that was somewhat plausible to make was Adam Warlock. His kit is pretty simple, with some unique twists that I really wanted to see in Overwatch. Unlike the past heroes, there was a large cast of Overwatch heroes that could potentially become the new Adam Warlock. Mizuki, for example, had his healing Casa, which had 2 charges and worked exactly like Adam's Avatar livestream. But his primary fire and other abilities would be hard to mix together. Mercy already had a Resurrect as an ability, so I could potentially see it being used to recreate Adam Warlock's ultimate. In the end though, I decided to stick with Alari, as she had the closest primary fire and would better easily match the effects to translate Adam Warlock into Overwatch. Plus, the designs are pretty much exactly the same, so that's always a bonus. First thing I was really excited to recreate was his passive. When Adam Warlock dies, he actually gets resurrected and can pick a spot to revive. Though I could see this being really overpowered, especially in a support, I think it's a really fun idea that would be exciting to put in the game. So now when Alari dies, she goes to a spectator mode, where she's able to move around, and when 10 seconds passes or the ability is activated, she's revived and back in the fight. Obviously, if you die again after this, you will have to fully respawn, and only then will the passive come back. It's honestly not too different from something like D.Va's demeching, so I could see it possibly not being too broken. Now, all that was left was the rest of Adam's kit, and unlike the other heroes, especially Scarlet Witch, I had to recreate every single ability from scratch, including the ultimates, and as you saw the passive, this would be a lot harder. But let's start with something simple. I made Adam Warlock's customized cluster, say that 5 times fast, and considering the complexities of the rest of his kits, I simplified it into a damage projectile, which isn't too far off, also because you can't really make charge abilities. Currently, it does 40 direct damage with no headshot, which I thought was fair as Adam Warlock is more of a damage dealing type of support considering his lack of healing. Moving on to the most exciting part of his kit, his Soul Bond. If you don't know, Soul Bond shares damage taken between a selected ally. There's a lot of crazy potential with this, like applying it to an ult in Genji or saving a teammate from a D.Va bomb. So using the projectile melee animation from before, you can apply it to an ally, giving them the marked effect. This was by far the most fun to play around with, but also very thought-provoking. It has a lot of potential, but its long cooldown makes it feel almost like an ultimate, but exciting nonetheless. Next, and a lot easier, was the Avatar livestream. I won't bore you with the details, but I just remade Mizuki's healing Casa and added another charge. It's a lot of fun, but also his only form of healing, so I need to make sure it was good. Now, we just talked about how interesting Adam's kit is, but the most bonkers thing is definitely his ultimate. It is a more powerful version of Mercy's old ultimate resurrection. Yes, that one. Basically, it places a spell field that revives all allies who die in its area, and it lasts 10 seconds. The trade-off though is that they only come back with 30% of their health, which I do think is fair. With Alari, creating the effect wasn't too impossible thanks to her ultimates. I just added some bonus effects to showcase its power, and it was looking great. All that was left was to resurrect players when they died, and some finishing touches, like a message to let you know that Alari resurrected you. Additionally, I swapped him from the Survivor sub-role into the Medic sub-role, since he didn't really have a movement ability to gain healing from. Adam Warlock plays as a long to mid-range weapon-focused support, often helping getting picks and finishing off enemies, and really only healing and supporting allies when necessary. His lack of movement also makes him very vulnerable from dives, but his sustain from both of his abilities and sub-roll passive make it manageable compared to similar heroes. And surprisingly, Adam Warlock actually succeeds in almost every composition. His slow bond is very effective on dive tanks to take more damage, and his avatar livestream is effective on quick moving targets, as there's not much to aim. But also his burst damage and long distance make him do well in poke compositions, allowing him to constantly keep pressure on the enemy team while maintaining his allies. A brawl composition is the only place I can see him struggle, as he doesn't do well in close quarters, but his sustain and pure damage may make him still useful. With such powerful abilities, he's definitely a force to be reckoned with, but can be easily crumpled if he doesn't have the resources from his team to keep him alive. But of course, no worries, he always gets a second chance. Now it's time for the last hero to be added into the game, and though I really wanted a tank to allow for a full team, 2 damage, 2 support, and 1 tank, Marvel Rivals tanks are just not easy to make. Most of them have really complicated abilities, have melee attacks for their primary fire, or just don't really have an Overwatch counterpart. My closest was Magneto and Sigma, but Sigma turned out to not mesh well with Workshop, so I unfortunately had to scrap it. My greatest apology to all of the tank mains. Maybe in a part 2 I can make one. With that said, I decided my last hero would be Psylocke, as from what I've seen, she's somewhat of a fan favorite. Now you may think that Genji's the perfect counterpart due to his dash and shurikens, but when you pay attention, they're actually pretty different. Psylocke's primary fire works more similarly to his shotgun, and her ultimate, though aesthetically similar, is completely different from Genji's and would be a nightmare to code. However, we do have a hero with a shotgun-like primary fire and an ultimate that actually matches gameplay-wise. So yeah, I'm sorry, Reaper was surprisingly the far better pick, and it would show considering how easy it was to implement. For starters, I decided to turn his Wraith form into her side blade dash. All that took was cutting his Wraith form short, dashing him forward upon use, damaging enemies he goes through, and granting it a second charge. And finally his dash was done, turning him into a kind of bonkers version of Tracer, but we only had 1 ability slot left, and I decided to use it on Psychic Stealth, as I mean, who even cares about winged shurikens? Let's be honest here. With the reuse of Warrior's Fate effect, it was honestly really simple, and it worked well with his aesthetics. And after that, Psylocke was officially finished. Like I said, Reaper made it really easily, especially compared to what I had to go through for Loki and Adam Warlock. Psylocke plays as a close-range flanker, having tools to easily engage the fights and disengage when needed. Her movement is her main focus, however, being able to weave throughout the fight to dodge stuns and deal damage. Psylocke would fit right into dive compositions, working well with Winston, Genji, Lucio, and Kiriko, but could also handle her own in brawl compositions with Reinhardt, Cassidy, Brigida, and Mizuki. Though she can be deadly in the hands of the right player, Psylocke can be easily shut down with well-timed cooldowns and misuse of her abilities, so ahead in the game is key to ensuring her survival and eliminations. Now, if that looks fun, you can actually check the game out yourself using the code AKWT1. But what were your thoughts on the heroes? Do you think you would main any of them, or would they go straight to your ban list? You should let me know in the comments below, and since you're here, you might as well give me a subscribe and like. Please, I really need it. Anyways, also check out my stream on Twitch, my Instagram, and my TikTok, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye, berries!